Welcome to Ground Dragon Martial Arts presents the Modern Martial Arts and Health Radio. This is Dr. Troy Schott. This is the introduction episode. So I'm doing this first episode really just kind of introduce myself and really to discuss what's going to kind of happen and a little bit about my experience with martial arts and health and stuff like that. So I'll be discussing several things, and then there'll be some links and stuff like that for show notes and stuff like that. So, as I said, I'm Dr. Troy Schott. I started Ground Dragon Martial Arts a few years ago as kind of a way to get like-minded people to really kind of get together and train some of the internal martial arts stuff that I've done over the years and really kind of explore more of it. As of summer of last year, I've taken a bit of a break from teaching, so currently I'm not teaching. That may change in the future, but as of right now, I don't have any direct plans of starting back up. But going back, I began martial arts back in 1994 with something called Young Olympians Karate. I believe it's now changed to Young Champions Karate. And it was kind of more of a mix mash of, there's probably a little bit of Kempo in there, a little bit of Korean style martial arts and Japanese martial arts. And it was a very American eclectic style. And it was taught through Parks and Rec system up in Santa Clarita where I grew up. And went there once a week, and I believe I made it up to brown belt. Tested for my black belt once, and I was about 18 at the time, so it was pretty ready to move on into my adult life. And but throughout that time, I really developed kind of a strong interest in Eastern philosophy and religion. And like most people, at least back in the 90s and before, during the 70s and the 80s, I was influenced by Bruce Lee and Kung Fu movies and Kwai-Chang Caine and the Kung Fu series. And at the time of the 1990s, the second Kung Fu series came out. With the grandson of Kwai-Chang Caine, who was also named Kwai-Chang Caine, who ran into his long lost son, that whole story. And I really became very interested in Chinese martial arts in particular, wanting to learn all that stuff. But even now there's no real Chinese martial arts up in Santa Clarita. I remember one time, I think it was about 16, and found some guy teaching Wing Chun out of his garage, but just had no way of getting to him to learn. But it was he was back when I was around 18, just finishing up with high school, and I met Steve Chevalier, who was teaching Yang style Taijiquan, mostly the Cheng Man-Ching short form, but he also had studied under Toni Demoulin, who studied first under Dung Kai-Ying, and then Alex Da-De-Dung, and so I learned all that style stuff with him, and really took more of an interest in kind of Chinese martial arts and internal style like Tai Chi as well. And like I said before, I'd really developed a strong interest in Eastern philosophy and religion, so I began, really more of my focus in Buddhism rather than Taoism, but I like the Taoist stuff as well. And as I got more deeper into Buddhism, I started also studying other types of Buddhism and some more modern day Buddhism, like that Buddhism which is taught by Thich Nhat Hanh, and now more so through monks and nuns of Plum Village, and the sister monasteries. And when I was about 19, I decided to make that effort to get into that life a little bit more seriously, and ordained as a novice monk under Thich Nhat Hanh, first starting out at Deer Park Monastery down in Escondido, close to San Diego, California, and really just focused on doing that, and spent a lot of time practicing different types of meditation and walking and chanting and all this type of stuff. And I did that until I was about 21 years of age when I disrobed. And we don't need to go into a big long reason why I left, but I really felt that life was just not for me. So I came back to where I grew up, and I went back to studying Tai Chi with Steve Chevalier, and I'd also ended up meeting Toni Demoulin. I met Alex Dong once, and really kind of spent some time learning that. And at the same time, I ended up going to massage school, where I got more into kind of the health aspect of focusing on learning about anatomy and science, and working on massage for people. It was around that time I really kind of started an interest in Baguazhang. And I've always been interested in Baguazhang, been interested in a lot of different types of Chinese martial arts. But Baguazhang, for some reason, really kind of struck me at the time. And, I don't know if it was this attraction of like, oh, we're going to be able to fight 8 people at a time, or, I'm just going to circle around my opponent, and, this, kind of the silly fantasy things that we believe at the time when we get interested in this stuff. But I started reading up on a lot of the Baguazhang history through the Pa Kua Chang Journal on CD that I'd got from Plum Publications. And I had bought the CD and read through it. Now, the actual journal ran from, I believe, the early 90s, maybe even 1989 to 1997. I'd have to go back and check. But it was through reading all of those that I actually found Tim Cartmell. And that was back in 2005. So I went to massage school from 2004 to 2005. I left the monastery about the end of 2003. And in 2005, I took the opportunity to go down and start attending classes under Tim Cartmell. And at the time, he was teaching a Xingyi Bagua class. It was kind of a mixed combo class on Saturday mornings for a couple hours. And I did that, and I also got into supplementing with kind of a Dutch style kickboxing and a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at House of Champions in Van Nuys, California. And I did that for about a good year or so, and then would still kind of see Tim on and off, and did a couple private lessons, things like that. And it was in 2008, a little closer to home, Ikata Martial Arts and Fitness opened up in Santa Clarita, Valencia area, and I took the opportunity to really kind of study some authentic JKD, some Jeet Kune Do, and a little bit of Savate and Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu as well. But kind of the big focus was Jeet Kune Do, and it was through there that I really kind of developed a very strong sense of combat and fighting and stuff like that, and because it's kind of what we really focused on, and obviously there was levels of fitness and things like that we did as well. And I had lost a lot of weight at the time because I'd gained a bunch through a hard depressive period, and I really focused on getting fit and things like that, and ended up doing personal training for a couple of years as well. And while I went back to school for my bachelor's, and then back in 2012, I ended up going to chiropractic school after getting my bachelor's in human biology. And I went to chiropractic school from 2012 to 2015. And, took a lot of time, studied a lot of anatomy. I mean, and I'll get into this a little bit more when I talk about chiropractic, or talk with people about chiropractic. But the amount of education that a chiropractor goes through, at least on a basic science level, through anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pathology, even down to kind of microbiology, immunology, and a lot of those basic science stuff is pretty on par with some schools, some med schools. And it's the clinical sciences that's where things start to separate. And obviously, chiropractors learn manipulation and adjusting and physical therapy modalities and all this type of stuff. But you spend those 3.5-4 years really kind of focusing on getting a very strong education. And it's not something like a massage school, but it really allows you to kind of see things from a very strong perspective, dealing with medical science and health and stuff like that. So one thing I ended up doing towards the end of my education is I continued regular training with Tim Cartmell in the internal Chinese martial arts of Xingyi and Baguazhang, and a little bit later into Taijiquan. And also taking a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with him and stuff like that, and really kind of focused on, kind of the cross between them. I've always been kind of interested in the ground a little bit, to some extent, even, and I mean to some extent in the fact that I really would like to avoid being down there any longer than I'd have to. But and that's why I've always thought to learn it, because if for some reason someone dragged me down there, would I know how to get up and get back into a safer position, whether that's more of a dominant standing position or the ability just to run away. So I did that with Tim, and I still continue to study with Tim, probably not as rarely as I would like, but Tim has extremely influenced my martial arts training, as well as Edward Monahan, who I didn't mention the name of the owner of Ikata Martial Arts and Fitness, and he, through Jeet Kune Do and with him, and having met Jerry Poteet and Jerry Poteet's wife, Fran Joseph Poteet, even Ed's wife, Sifu Ed's wife, Joanne Wabaska. I really kind of learned quite a bit from all these teachers about fighting, about martial arts, about taking care of yourself and health and fitness and things like that. And then it was sometime after training with Tim that I met Jason Stowe. Jason Stowe is he's a Chinese martial arts teacher, is based here in Los Angeles area, and I studied mostly Yin style Bagua with him. His Yin style comes through Gong Bao Tian. Gong Bao Tian was a Yin Fu student, and probably even learned a little bit from Dung Haichuan. But I spent some time with that, and I still train with him, and getting a little bit more into training with him as well. But we've, through all these teachers, I've really kind of learned different stuff and things like that. And then I also spent time training at UFC gym for Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. All these guys have really kind of shaped and molded how I did things and approached things and moved and stuff like that. And I even took a little bit of time to fight kind of a hobbyist level sanda and freestyle push hands in a few tournaments, things like that. And nothing grandstanding, champion winship wins or anything like that, but really just kind of a a focus on how would I deal with using my technique under pressure. So a little bit into doing that, I ended up founding Ground Dragon Martial Arts, as I mentioned earlier, which is kind of presenting the modern martial arts and health radio. But it's Ground Dragon is a Dilong, and I should say that when I pronounce Chinese names, I am not very good with Chinese, so please excuse it. I don't speak it. I don't understand it. I've done my best to kind of learn how to pronounce some of the terms so that I don't butcher it too much. But please apologize for anyone who is a speaker. I do apologize for that to you guys. I know that sometimes it could probably be a little aggravating hearing it, but yeah, and it kind of focused on really working on Ground Dragon martial arts stuff. But Ground Dragon, it's a reference to certain material taught through Tim Cartmell and from his teacher Liang Kuchen about dealing with being knocked down in a fight. And it's that same concept going back to, okay, if I get knocked down, how do I get up safely so I don't get hurt worse? So that's kind of where that terminology comes from, and this kind of a reference to dog style boxing and stuff like that from Chinese martial arts, and a very very strong focus more on kind of wrestling, grappling, and that type of stuff. So that's kind of where the name came from. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I had recently stopped teaching, taking a break from teaching this past summer 2019, and I did that for a number of reasons, some personal, but I felt really the need that I needed to take a step back and learn a little bit more before I continued on with the teaching career. And I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at Hollywood Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that is located on Sunset Boulevard, Sunset La Brea in California. And I started going there back in, I think it was September of 2019. I've been training there regularly since, obviously posting this podcast. And the idea for that was I really wanted to kind of focus on getting good at effective self-defense techniques and really kind of honing that, because I really felt like, I feel like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just kind of has a good feel for that type of stuff, and it's becoming more and more common. We're finding some of these Chinese martial arts practitioners, other martial arts practitioners, complementing their martial art, not subtracting or deleting their other martial arts, but complementing their martial arts with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or some form of grappling, wrestling, that type of stuff. So that was kind of my goal with it, and I picked the school for a couple of reasons. Number one, it had a very good vibe to it, and they were doing both standing and ground stuff, as opposed to just kind of focusing on more of the sport kind of groundwork. So I really kind of I like that aspect. And then the other reason was because it's really close to my clinic where I work 5 days a week for 40 hours a week. And this way it made it easy to kind of run upstairs right after work and go to jiu-jitsu. So that's kind of the main thing. And obviously now I'm founded this podcast, so that's kind of the basic history behind all this. So kind of one thing I wanted to talk about was my martial arts philosophy and my health philosophy. And one thing I see within martial arts, Chinese martial arts in particular, is this very strong focus on forms and you're learning tons of forms and looking really pretty and very aesthetic and almost this kind of performance-esque type of fashion. And I've I've never really seen someone who is like that, so focused on performance, be very effective in terms of combat, martial arts, and fighting and stuff like that. So I've come to learn that it's kind of solo partner drills and sparring tend to need to be a little bit more focused on as opposed to forms. Forms are really kind of more of a attribute development, similar to how a boxer will jump rope and hit a double end bag or a speed bag or something like that, or do a little bit of light shadow boxing, as they warm up. And that's kind of how I've seen forms, and they're really kind of a process of learning, refining linked movements, very sports specific, strengthening, conditioning. Especially if you take real deep stances, you move very quickly, that type of stuff, and it was really that aspect of it that sparring and doing both solo and partner drills, like solo single movement exercises, partner drills with people where you're kind of drilling the techniques over and over again, kind of building that muscle memory so that it is less about thinking about what you're going to do as opposed to just letting it happen. And sparring is really kind of a way of learning how to let go of your ego in a high intensity environment. And obviously sparring never needs to be as intense as fighting, because it's not fighting. Sparring is not fighting, it's not combat. And I know some people use that as an argument of why you shouldn't do it, but I think that's kind of a little bit of a fallacy there, that you should still spar, but understand that sparring is not fighting or combat. And it's really just simulated fighting for the sake of learning. And I think it's really kind of important to understand that. Now, sparring is also not a combat sport. You don't spar as a combat sport. And obviously there are some tournaments, they use sparring as kind of like the term for combat sport. But when you're in a combat sport and you are fighting in kind of like a squared off area, a ring, cage, or something like that, it's a very safe place. And that's not a bad thing. It's a very safe avenue to build real skill that involves as minimal injury risk as possible. And it can be very effective in understanding how well you're going to hold up in a very high intense environment. And it kind of gives you a good understanding. And it's something I always kind of want to relay, and this is something that Tim Cartmell has relayed to me. Much of the martial arts is a very duel, like, two people who know they're going to get into a fight and face each other. That's what Chinese martial arts, is what martial arts in general tends to focus on and train for the most. Whether you fight in an arena or you fight in the street, you generally kind of know at that time you're going to get into a fight, unless you're being attacked. When you're being attacked, and it's very kind of random, and we can get into kind of like the whole social violence aspects of it, stuff like that. But when there's kind of an agreed upon duel between two different people, that's kind of where martial arts focus tends to be, regardless of whether you want to believe so or not. And hopefully, you can get some opinions on that. But I've kind of seen it that way, and it's been expressed to me that way um, through my teachers. Now, that being said, there's this aspect of martial arts, and I think this has really kind of been heightened by TV, film, this type of stuff, that one person's going to be so skilled that they're going to be able to fight off multiple people and not lose their breath and not run out of energy, not have conditioning be a factor. And I think it's really kind of important to understand that fighting multiple opponents is not impossible, but it's implausible. And it can be done, and people have obviously done it. We have video of people doing it, but there's probably a whole lot more stories of there being people who have just gotten beaten the hell out of just because they went up against more than one person. And it can be a very confusing time. A fight, whether it's in a ring or in a squared off area, or it's on the street, or you're being attacked or whatever, it's extremely stressful. Some of the most common phrases I've heard to it are, "You never rise to the occasion; you fall to the level of your training," and typically you tend to forget about 70% of everything you know during a confrontation. And it's really just that kind of foreknowledge of understanding that you are probably going to have a very, very difficult time fighting more than one person at a time. And to understand that we need to really kind of look at martial arts, combat, fighting in a lot more realistic way, as opposed to some sort of fantasy. Um, Something I get all the time, as when I adjust people in the clinic and perform cervical or neck manipulation. And they asked me, what's going to happen when you adjust my neck? Can you snap someone's neck? And I had gotten curious one day. And I always said no, because it's pretty impossible to do that to a healthy person's neck. And if you don't have a healthy neck, or you're not a healthy person, you have some sort of medical issue that's going to prevent being treated effectively. Generally, I'm not going to touch that, but kind of the one thing I was always curious about is, how much force does it really take? And it takes about 1,000 to 1,200 pounds of torque to snap a healthy adult human neck, and that's a lot of force. And the other aspect of that is, it takes about 5 to 9 foot drop if a person is hung to death. So to snap the neck, as opposed to strangulation. And so as morbid as this sounds, this is kind of an interesting aspect of this, is that we really need to take that more realistic scientific understanding of not just the human body, but how the body works in terms of combat and stress and martial arts and fighting, stuff like that, and really understand that we can't really focus on some of these fantastical stories or movies or anything like that, because movies portray things in a certain way to move along the storyline, It's always important to remember that. Or the same thing with reading a book or anything like that. There are plot devices and things like that need to be used to move it around. Okay? And that kind of takes me into kind of that historical myth versus reality aspect of martial arts, particularly Chinese martial arts, because there tends to be a lot of beliefs in certain historical elements, and usually we find out the case that it's not so fantastic, but it's also a lot cooler than than you thought. So it's an important aspect of that, and you may find that with certain guests I have on in the future that when we talk about history and things like that, that it doesn't have to be so focused on the myths. The myths are sometimes just passed down as oral history, and it changes each time, or someone made a movie, or going back to that, and there was someone who wrote a story going back to that where it influenced it, and then things just get jumbled and mixed and added and deleted and things like that, so you end up getting a completely different story than the actual close to truth of what happened. So it's just kind of important to understand that. So that may come up in discussions later down the line. So the other thing, like I said, I want to talk about was my health philosophy. I really believe health is a personal responsibility. We're all responsible for our health, and I think it's just important to understand that health is not the absence of disease. Just because you are not sick or you do not feel sick does not mean you're healthy. You still have to strive and achieve for health, and obviously a big way of doing that is proper nutrition. And you get a lot of times where people are like, is there a diet you really recommend, or is there a diet you do, or anything like that? And there's no one diet. If you want to try to, try the paleo diet or the warrior diet, the vegan, vegetarian diet, or this diet or that diet, or what's right for your blood type, whatever, more power to you, try it. But generally what's going to be agreed to is, in some fashion, is that whole fruits and veggies are key. Water is key. Getting regular sleep is going to be big on that too. And I also believe it's okay to eat meat. Obviously, some people, based on their own kind of personal variations of biochemistry, tend to do better with or without less or lot of meat. You know what I mean? So it's really that important to understand that type of stuff. I really feel like we need to minimize some processed foods. The processing aspect really kind of adds that sodium and other salts and stuff like that. So understanding that it's good to kind of decrease all those types of things is definitely a good idea. And there's always this big push to like bioorganic, and a lot of places, organic's either really expensive for certain populations or communities, or it's not even available. And it's fine if that's what you want to spend your money on, and you are in real belief that that's going to help you out, then more power to you. But I don't think it's really necessary. I think if you really kind of focus on whole fruits and veggies as much as possible, eating some sort of protein, primarily animal protein would be best. But obviously, if you're not into eating meat because you're a vegetarian, whether for personal or religious reasons or anything like that, that's fine. But understand that you're going to need to get it from somewhere, and that's there's something, those kind of general principles I think are important to consider. I think the other thing is good to consider is that movement is life. This has been a kind of a personal philosophy of mine, that if you're not spending enough time moving around and doing stuff, then it's almost as if you're dead. And I know that sounds a little dramatic, but it really helps to kind of understand the the interesting aspect of, if you need to move, you need to do stuff, you need to find that movement that's really going to trigger a healthy response in your life. And then the other thing is that strength is super important. And there's been this very strong disinterest and almost um, negative attitude towards getting stronger. Uh, and I don't think it's intentional necessarily, but I think that um, people don't focus on getting strong enough, and I think it's really kind of a very important thing. And I know I'd have to look it up to find it. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes, but um, there was a study done showing, I think last year, the benefits of care and stuff like that. And in long-term care, strength showed a 69% benefit, as opposed to like stretching, which was only 6%. And a lot of people, that's always a question I get in the clinic is, hey doc, what kind of stretches can I do? And my response is usually, you know well, as you get out of the pain, we can focus a little bit on stretching, but what I eventually want you to do is really focus on getting stronger. Strength is super important. It's going to help you move. And I think there's just really this idea, and maybe it's just because of certain media figures and things that people we've seen, that strength means bulky mass, and that's not true at all. That type of bodybuilding training is very specific, very very sought for. You can't really get that naturally big off of doing 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 days a week of some sort of strength training. Okay. The other aspect is mobility. And going back to the whole stretching thing, people really kind of focus on flexibility a little too much, but I really like to focus on mobility. And I define mobility as the ability to move through greater ranges of motion with strength and control. And that includes motor control, the ability to kind of sense your awareness and everything like that, and know where you are and how you feel, and we call that proprioception. And this ability to move through these great ranges of motion with strength control is so important for health. There's they call it the health test, where can you sit cross-legged on the floor and stand up and sit back down again. And it's supposed to be some sort of the test to determine whether you're going to have a long life or not. And I think it's kind of an important aspect, that mobility, with the ability to move through a great range of motion with strength and control, is super necessary in our lives. And I think that kind of ties back into that movement as life aspect. And the other thing is, I want to talk about, and I mentioned this as someone who's a doctor of chiropractic, but body work stuff is really important to health. Whether that's acupuncture, like I said, chiropractic, massage, you know, whatever it is going to be super necessary in maintaining your health, maintaining your ability to recover from exercise and training as a martial artist, and helping to keep that body able to move. And I think that's really kind of an important focus. A lot of times we have this notion, and this is based off of kind of old traditional Western medicine models, is that you go to the doctor, gives you some sort of medicine or something like that. You take the medicine. Once the medicine's done, you're healed, right? Antibiotics just kind of a big factor. So a lot of times people have this notion that, okay, I'm going to go see the chiropractor, I'm going to go see the acupuncturist, and once it feels better from them, I'm done. I don't need to go back. And that ties back into my whole philosophy of health is not the absence of disease. That kind of sick care model really doesn't lend itself to a healthy, a healthy focus on getting yourself moving and feeling better and keeping it that way. It just gets you there, and then maybe in 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, 6 decades, whatever, you're right back where you started, maybe even worse. And hopefully, if you get 60 years out of that's fantastic. But most people, it's closer to like 6 weeks or 6 months, and it's an important understanding that we have this knowledge to really help people feel better and move better. So why not take advantage of that? And why not get that taken care of? Now, obviously, I understand the limitations that some people face in terms of, affordability and health insurance, things like that. And that's where you really have to kind of do your homework. And like I said, health is a personal responsibility. If you really want to get there, you'll make those efforts to find those things that are going to help you and benefit you the most. So that's, I think, kind of where I wanted to start things off with, and really focus on that type of stuff. So you'll find a lot of what I discussed to kind of weave through many of the next upcoming episodes, and obviously, as with any podcast, it's going to shift and change and move, and there will be different things happening and stuff like that. So I just kind of keep that in mind, and as we continue to move forward, we'll hopefully see some good things coming out of this. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you next time.